Hello, everyone. It's me, David Chen, here at Decoding TV. Welcome to a Decoding TV bonus episode. Today, we're going to talk about the 2025 Emmy nominations. And joining me for this conversation is one of the most knowledgeable people about television who exists on the internet. He's the creator of the Episodic Medium newsletter, which I consider a must read. Check it out at episodicmedium.substack.com. Myles McNutt, welcome back to Decoding TV.
Thank you so much for having me. And in addition, I appreciate the night words about me and TV generally, but I am particularly obsessive about the Emmys. So I
Yes.
do feel like, while I might sometimes be like, oh, no, that's not true. I am 100% the most obsessive person to have this conversation with to discuss this particular topic.
And that is why we are so blessed to have you here. So the Emmy nominations were announced today, and what we wanted to do here is talk about some of the biggest stories to come out of these nominations. And I'm going to read a little bit here from the Hollywood Reporter about what the nominees were. So let's just kind of talk about like what some of the big stories were here. All right, Severance leads the nominees for the 2025 Emmy Awards, which were announced Tuesday. The Apple TV Plus series nabbed a total of 27 nominations, including Best Drama Series, where it will compete alongside Andor, The Diplomat, The Last of Us, Paradise, The Pit, Slow Horses, and The White Lotus. The Penguin was next with a total of 24 nominations, followed by The Studio and The White Lotus with 23 apiece, The Last of Us with 16, Andor and Hacks with 14 nominations each, and Adolescence, The Bear, and The Pit with 13 nominations apiece. The Studio tied the record for most nominations in a single year for a comedy series, tied with The Bears Hall in 2024, and it will compete for Best Comedy Series with Abbott Elementary, The Bear, Nobody Wants This, Only Murders in the Building, Shrinking, and What We Do in the Shadows. So those were some of the big shows that got a ton of nominations. Those were basically the shows that the Television Academy recognizes. These are the biggest, highest quality shows of the year. Myles McNutt, we're going to talk about our overall reactions to this. We're going to talk about some snubs, some stuff that we thought, maybe should have been nominated that weren't. And then, as usual, we're going to talk about some weird things that happened this year. So let's start by talking about overall reactions. Myles, to me, this feels like overall a very strong batch of nominees for Best Drama and Best Comedy Series. What do you think? Do you agree? Do you think there's some stuff in here that's like really weirdly shouldn't be here? What do you think?
I wouldn't say weirdly shouldn't be here. I mean, I think in general, there's always an outlier. If there's one show I think that was surprised to crack those lists, it would be Paradise,
Yes.
the Hulu drama series. Not because I thought it was bad, but rather because it didn't feel like it had much cultural momentum. It wasn't a show people were really talking about,
Right.
but it ended up sneaking into all of its main acting categories in addition to this drama series nomination, which I think is a testament to both a sort of it was Hulu's one drama series that they were really pushing, right? If you look at sort
Hmm.
of that list of drama shows, you have a bunch of representation from HBO and Max, from Disney, from this, but like in terms of Hulu FX, this was really their one play. And so with all of that might put behind it, maybe that made a difference. But I think otherwise, look, these are all very much well-regarded shows that I think from a series perspective reflect the breadth of television and its greatness at any given point in time. And for those reasons, while I might quibble with certain absences in certain cases, I'm not going to suggest that there's a show here that's like, it's not like that year. Sorry to pick on Cobra Kai, but the year that Cobra Kai got nominated for Best Comedy Series is just sort
Wow.
of like, no, I don't think that that was an acceptable nomination at that moment in time. I wouldn't even really argue it's a comedy. Like, to me, that was just sort of like this zeitgeisty thing that didn't really track. I feel similarly about the Mandalorian nomination the same year, if we're being honest. But I feel like in this case, we have a really good slate of shows. What I wish, and this is kind of previewing the previous conversations, is that the acting categories reflected that same breadth.
Mm.
That it seemed
Mm.
as though that when they're forced to only vote for a show once in one category, that's great. But if you actually go to the acting categories, it's very clear that TV Academy did not watch this breadth of shows to a degree that would allow for a diverse slate of nominations.
Well, to be fair, I mean the acting nomination categories, like best actor and best actress, I think are okay diversity wise. But then the supporting actor, guest actor, those are kind of a mess, kind of a disaster, honestly, in my
Right.
opinion.
And no, and I
Yeah.
think and I think as lead actors, you can only have one or two leads,
Right.
meaning that you can sort of like naturally put that out. And there is still some ridiculousness in the midst of those categories by nature of categorization we can get into. But no, the supporting categories, I think I cannot believe at this stage that the TV Academy is not looking at those supporting acting drama categories and feeling as though that they have like reached a point of no return. That if they were willing to like completely upend their entire process because Orange is the New Black flip-flopped categories a decade ago, if they're not willing to make an intervention when two shows are so dominant every year. Even like last year, it was Succession and The Morning Show. This year, we've just switched to two different shows that weren't eligible last year. Like, it's sort of like there's just no
Right.
ability for them to sort of understand and engage with that. There need to be guideposts, there need to be limits. And I'm here to advocate for that.
All right. Well, since you've brought up the subject, let's get into it right now. Okay. So, best actor in a drama series: Sterling K. Brown in Paradise, Gary Oldman in Slow Horses, Pedro Pascal in The Last of Us, Adam Scott in Severance, and Noah Wyle in The Pit. This is a very solid, reasonable set of nominees, right? No.
Well,
Okay. Go
calling
ahead.
Pedro Pascal a lead actor in The Last of Us season 2 is again. So the way this works is the lead categories, there are no rules, right? You can do whatever you want. Quite famously, Rob Lowe always submitted himself as lead actor in every show he was in. And Pedro Pascal was previously nominated as lead actor. HBO wants that nomination in lead actor. They know that the people voting for it aren't going to be thinking, "Oh wow, he only appeared in a few episodes this season." They
I
probably
mean,
didn't
he
even
was
watch
in.
it.
Okay, Miles. To be fair, he was in 4 episodes of the show.
Okay,
I believe, by my measure, right? Which is
right.
I believe the majority of episodes, if I'm not
That's
mistaken. So,
technically the majority of episodes. He is barely in the 4th one. Let's be
uh,
very clear.
okay, all right.
It's
But
like
anyway, yeah,
it's
the
really,
point is taken. The
really
point is
poorly
taken.
at
Okay,
that.
yeah. So,
It's bad. But
yeah, go ahead.
But then I would say that if I'm sort of looking at this, the absence of Diego Luna, I feel like in terms of the scale of what he was working with in Andor
Yeah,
across its 12 episodes, anchoring that show compared to what Pascal did, Pascal should have submitted in supporting. It would have made more sense. It would have better reflected the way that played out. But I think it was very evident that they knew he would get a nomination here. And so that's what happened. Like I said, I was surprised by Sterling K. Brown getting in, but obviously well beloved from his time on This Is Us, a very common nominee. And frankly, this is not to suggest that this is the only reason, but I do often wonder about performers who appear at the beginning of the Emmy ballot, that when voters are going through it and going through the names of the people eligible, do they just stop at the first name they recognize and admire and just kind of select it? This is going to
mm-hmm,
come up again in comedy in a few minutes here,
mm-hmm.
but it's just sort of like, it's not against the performer to suggest a grand conspiracy, but I've always wondered for like the people just going through the ballots, how much does alphabetical order play a role when it comes to these fringe positions? Whereas I would argue the other 4 are all pretty kind of prominent and established in their expectations here. I just wonder. Just a theory. Just a theory.
Just wondering. You're just asking.
Theories.
You're just asking questions, Miles.
Just asking questions.
There is Best Actress in a Drama Series. That's Kathy Bates and Matlock, Sharon Horgan in Bad Sisters, Britt Lower in Severance, Bella Ramsey in The Last of Us, and Kerry Russell, The Diplomat. Again, not a terrible category because it's at least 5 different people in 5 different shows, right?
Yeah, and I would
yeah.
argue, and I'm very curious in this case, sort of to me, it's a question of what is Severance going to sweep? Right? Like, is Severance the show? At which point I would argue that Lower is very clearly somebody who can kind of dominate. But I would argue that Bates is sort of at an undeniable point in her career in a role that really suits her and plays to those strengths. And I do think there's a constituency of the TV Academy that still watches broadcast TV, even if the nominations don't reflect that fact. And so I think that I would call Bates the front runner here at the end of the day. If I'm kind of looking at the category as it plays out. I will notice though that like with only 5 nominees, there were people left off this list, right? Like, because we did go up to like 6 on a pretty consistent basis recently. It has been 6 in the past. Just 5 does not necessarily feel like it captures the full breadth. We have 8 nominees for series, but only 5 nominees for lead. Feels wrong. Just saying, it feels wrong.
Well, then we start to get into the weird stuff. So, Best Supporting Actor in a Drama Series. I'm actually going to put this on the screen. If you're watching, we're broadcasting live right now on youtube.com/@decodingtv. Best Supporting Actor in a Drama Series: Zach Cherry in Severance, Walton Goggins in The White Lotus, Jason Isaacs in The White Lotus, James Marsden in Paradise, Sam Rockwell in The White Lotus, Tremel Tillman in Severance, and John Turturro in Severance. Leading you to believe that possibly there's only 3 shows that exist out there: Severance, The White Lotus, and Paradise. And by the way, this is going to get worse as we go on this broadcast/podcast recording. But yeah, I mean, this is where the dynamics that you mentioned earlier come into play, right? Where it's like, this does not recognize the full breadth of supporting acting talent that is on television right now.
No, and I mean, I think it's one of those cases where, look, The White Lotus did this last time, right? Severance didn't, right? Severance did have 2 nominees in this category previously and now has 3. And I want to be very clear that, like, other than Sam Rockwell, we'll talk about in a second, I think all of these nominees were central to their seasons, right? We're giving really dynamic performances. But, like, voters should have to choose. Like, to me, 2 per show. This is not controversial. This is
Hmm.
not, I'm not trying to say 1 per show, right? Allow for the fact that 2 supporting performance could be dominant and it's expansive, but it's just like, look, sorry, Jack Cherry, right? Sorry, Sam Rockwell, right? Like, we're going to cut you from this list and put in performers from other TV shows. We're going to put Stellan Skarsgård in here. We're going to find people who sort of better reflect the depth of those systems. For the record, I have nothing against Zach Cherry. He just has less to do in that Severance season. That's not his fault. And Sam Rockwell is frankly an unfortunate scenario. If you're wondering, like, how is it possible that he's in the same category? He's barely in The White Lotus. He appears in what is clearly a guest role. He's
Yeah.
not among the credited cast. He kind of pops in somewhat unexpectedly, an unannounced cameo that becomes this kind of part of it. The problem
He
is
was
that he
more than one
appeared.
episode. Is that the thing?
No, 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 no. It is 50%. If you appear in 50% of a season's episode, you cannot be a guest actor.
Mm.
That is the rule that was put in place. This is actually a result of Cloris Leachman, who appeared in Raising Hope, and they credited her as a guest actress for contract reasons, and they submitted her as a guest actress, but she was in the entire show. And everyone's like, that doesn't make any sense. So the 50% rule was implemented. They've actually taken away nominations before. Peter McNichol in Veep, they submitted him and he was nominated, and then they realized he appeared for like 2 seconds in an episode, and
Mm.
as a result he had been in 50%. So Sam Rockwell was in 4 of those 8 White Lotus episodes. He's barely in 3 of them,
Right.
but because of that he had to be nominated here. And this is an Oscar-winning actor who has a very showy moment in that season. They
Yeah.
obviously wanted to acknowledge him, but again, the idea that voters would be like, I want to go find Sam Rockwell in this ballot for barely being in that season, and overlook so many actors who were such prominent parts of their own shows, just speaks to how narrow in vision these voters can be and where it comes from. If we cut 2 of them, it creates 2 spaces. It allows for more space to better reflect those ideas. And I will note, it we'll get to the guest stuff in comedy for a second, which is a whole different
Yeah.
issue. But like within the comedy supporting categories, we don't have this same problem. There is more diversity in those
Yeah.
nominations, and I don't know why that is. But like, the people voting for drama series need to be stopped. Like, they are no longer capable of making their own decisions. I will strip them of all agency. It has to be done.
I mean, I actually don't think that the comedy noms are that much more diverse than the drama ones from what I'm looking at. But first, we got to talk about the guest stuff, right? So this is also
Yeah.
really bad, right? So I'm reading here: best guest actor in a comedy series. Oh, I actually, yeah, this is the one I screenshotted because it's so ridiculous. So,
Yes.
best guest actor in a comedy series: John Bernthal in The Bear, Bryan Cranston in the studio, Dave Franco in the studio, Ron Howard in the studio, Anthony Mackie in the studio, Martin Scorsese in the studio. I guess the studio is the only show that had guest actors, from what I can tell in this list. Best guest actress in a comedy series: Olivia Colman, The Bear; Jamie Lee Curtis, The Bear; Cynthia Erivo, Poker Face; Robbie Hoffman, Hacks; Zoe Kravitz, The Studio; Julianne Nicholson, Hacks. So pretty rough, man. Like, all these are very talented people, but like,
Yes.
that is a pretty rough list in terms
I
of
would
representing the
say
diversity of guest actors in comedy series this year. Go ahead.
So. I would say that in the case of guest actress, that's relatively balanced, in the sense that Erivo does get in for Poker Face. You have 2 from the different shows, only 1 studio, etc. Hacks is a big hit. It makes
Only
sense.
one the studio is Miles's praise. They only did one the
That's
studio. That's
stupid.
it. That's it.
But I want to be very clear here, though. My point on this is, look, the guest actor one is ridiculous. Martin Scorsese, an acting Emmy nominee, is hilarious. It feels like I'm being trolled. It feels like a joke. That being said, my biggest problem with these guest acting in a comedy series nominees is the absence of someone from the studio. That being acclaimed Canadian director Sarah Polley, who was
Mm,
not nominated for playing herself, despite the fact that all the men were. To
mm.
which I say that is very on brand for the way Hollywood works. And if we're looking
Th-
for a meta
There
commentary,
should be an
I
episode
love
of the
it.
studio about
This
that
would be an
topic, I
episode of
think.
the studio about this topic. I think so.
Yeah.
But I just felt ultimately that like that was the performance that captured me and felt like she was playing with her own star text in a way that didn't feel over the top, that was still grounded, that reminded you of what a great actress she was. And ultimately that there wasn't room for her, but there was room for Ron Howard and for Martin Scorsese in those same capacities, even Anthony Mackie. Franco and Kravitz at least are part of the finale, where they're kind of like at the
Hmm.
centerpiece of the sort of madcap zany antics. The rest, I think it's not surprising. It's such a Hollywood oriented show. It's very much navel gazing. I don't think we should be shocked that it overperformed in these categories. I think that the main cast nominations are very much deserved, and I like the show. But you're right that it sort of again raises that question of like, look, just limit it to two per show, and we can at least guarantee that in a slate of 6 nominees, there would be at least 3 shows represented, and that's progress, Dave. That is progress by the standard set by that
Hmm.
guest actor in a comedy series category.
All right. I know I'm jumping around a little bit here. I shouldn't have clipped that one earlier, but just for completeness sake, let's also take a look at the best supporting actress in a drama series, right? Patricia Arquette, Severance; Carrie Coon, The White Lotus; Catherine Lanasa, The Pit; Julianne Nicholson, Paradise; Parker Posey, The White Lotus; Natasha Rothwell, The White Lotus; Amy Lou Wood, The White Lotus. I mean, that's
And
that's
again,
rough. It's just again, just so few shows are represented there, right?
and I want to be
Um,
very clear, I am fairly confident that 7 and 8 on this list would be Leslie Bibb and Michelle Monaghan from The White Lotus.
you
Right?
think?
Like, I think if we extended out from this, I think it would just be there. And like for me, this is a case where I'm very curious where this lands, because I look at this and think, look, Carrie Coon has been, she was nominated for the Gilded Age last year. It's very evident that voters support her and are engaged with her. And I argue she has the biggest monologue in that season, in terms of being prominent. I think
Hmm.
Parker Posey has the most Jennifer Coolidge-esque performance in terms of being
Hmm.
this sort of very exaggerated character. But I also think that there will be a lot of momentum behind The Pit as a kind of throwback to more traditional television. I think Noah Wyle has to be considered the frontrunner drama actor at this stage based on what we know and
Nice.
see. And I think the fact that Lanasa snuck in, that one member of cast from The Pit in this sea of White Lotus, as it were, um, I think gives her a real shot, at potentially stealing this one, depending on how the kind of. So this to me, this is an interesting race. To me, there's nothing interesting about that supporting actor race. I couldn't care less, right, of
Yeah.
what's going on. This, I think, at least has some interesting narratives attached to it. And again, the Paradise love for Julianne Nicholson, I don't think it's a huge. I think we should have maybe it was underestimated because people forgot the fact that Nicholson and Sterling K. Brown, of course, have recently won Emmys. Marsden was just nominated for Jury Duty. These are people that are doing the circuit, right? They're on the FYC circuit, doing all the panels, going to all the parties, playing all the goes. Somebody pointed out for The Pit, like Catherine Lanasa and Shauna Tosi played pickleball on like the Santa Monica Pier against cast members from Hacks as part of like an Emmy stunt tied to this. So like they're putting the work in, and I do think
They're
that's a
putting in
part of
those
this.
pickleball hours, and as a
Right.
result, surely they
And
deserve a supporting actor
right.
nomination.
Yeah. I think we have to ask ourselves that question of how much we should be just realizing how much of this happens without our awareness, right? That we think it's the TV shows. It's not, right? It's the campaigns, it's the interviews, it's the sit downs, the screenings, all the things that are kind of moving the needle where the actual shows themselves might as well be incidental.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like the process is entirely creatively bankrupt, and it's all about schmoozing and who you know. I mean, really, that's what the theme of all of our conversations about this topic has been over the years. The
Yeah.
question is just how creatively bankrupt is it, and sometimes it's like it's actually a pretty good set of nominees. I will say I'm a big fan of Catherine Lanasa. She played Nurse Dana Evans in The Pit. She's been on TV for decades. This is her first Emmy nomination. I thought she's one of those actors who's putting in the work year after year, unheralded, character actor basically, and now this is her time to shine. And she was awesome in that show, and I'm rooting for her in this category. So,
I was
anyway,
also really it was really weird for her to show up in Daredevil Born Again. I don't know
mm.
if you were watching that too, but she shows up very randomly as a supporting character in the midst of the Kingpin story. And it's just sort of like, no, you're Dana Evans now. Like that's who you are. Like it is that kind of transformative nature of like a recurring TV character come to life. I asked a question earlier in the year about the Pitt Supporting Actress nominations, because there were multiple great contenders: Taylor Dearden, Fiona Dourif, Tracy Fiacord, who I thought were both all very strong in their own ways. And to me, Lanasa just felt like the best narrative. Like you say, she's been around forever, a very much long-term actress finding a role that really captures it. And it is very much a supporting performance. It is not a supporting performance that like jumps into the lead all the time, right? We're not like, in the case of the White Lotus ones, they like move in and out of that story at different intervals. Like she is a nurse, a supporting role, and yet captures you and captures the essence of that, even when she's not the center of attention. I think it just exemplifies what this category is in a really real way. So that's, if I have a strongest rooting interest, that's probably it in the grand scheme of things, in terms of where that comes from.
We got to talk about best guest actor in a drama series. Okay, so Giancarlo Esposito in The Boys, Scott Glenn in The White Lotus, Sean Hatosi in The Pit, Joe Pantoliano in The Last of Us, Forrest Whitaker in Andor, and Jeffrey Wright in The Last of Us. Again, not that many shows represented, but the thing I want to highlight here is Forrest Whitaker's nomination for Andor, the only acting nomination that Andor received this year, which is the closest thing there is to a travesty at the Emmys this year. I mean, we have people in the chat room, by the way. Asif in the chat room is saying, shocked that actors in Andor not on these lists. Diego Luna, Kyle Stoller, Stellan Skarsgård, Genevieve O'Reilly, Denise Goff, Elizabeth Dulau. I mean, these are all performances that I would put up alongside any one of these nominees, and none of them were recognized. It's almost like the ceremony that gave 0 Emmys to Better Call Saul might not always have a good handle on what good acting is. What do you think, Myles?
What's weird about this is, like, look, Better Call Saul was coming right off of Breaking Bad, a very dominant series, and Better Call Saul was a legal drama. It was a show that's shown it can win Emmys in the past. The problem with Andor is that it's science fiction and it's Star Wars. I think the simple truth is there are huge quantities of voters who are never going to take it seriously as long as it comes from that franchise context, for where it seems as if it's just part of this Disney enterprise to sell toys. And obviously Andor is so much more than that. Obviously Andor transcends its context. Obviously Tony Gilroy is doing things with the Star Wars show that we presumed you couldn't do in a Star Wars show in the Disney era and in our understanding of that. But none of it matters if you just can't get your foot in the door. And I think that that's where it's very clear. I can make a series list. You see it in writing and directing, because the writers and directors are the kind of people who are going to be acknowledging that and engaging with it. But the simple truth is that the performances are always going to feel or be perceived as incidental. I think it's all a giant travesty. But this is the same thing that happened in season 1. Like, to me, I found this post again on Blue Sky just to kind of remind myself of this. But like, Andy Serkis wasn't nominated for season 1 for guest actor.
Yeah, that
and like
sucks.
that is like the clearest vision of a well-respected performer in a clear guest role who captures you, who lives on to the point where fans are like, why aren't we following?
Where's that guy? Where's that guy this season?
And
right? People want to know.
And yet it doesn't make sense to continue it. It's so perfect the way it is, and yet still nothing. No ability to break through. It just goes to show you that, like, why is Forrest Whitaker here? Because he's Forrest Whitaker. The people who nominated Forrest Whitaker didn't see the gas monologue. Like, I truly don't think that they really saw why that's there. I simply think that it's name recognition that gets him above the top line and makes that work. And someone like Elizabeth Dulau does not have that, was never going to have that. It's just not an era where I think the voters are watching enough TV to really take Andor as seriously as it deserved. And I think that's going to go down as a real shame of this kind of Emmy year. And I don't know if it's that Disney doesn't know how to really like do the for your consideration stuff in a way that can break through that. I don't know if it's a matter of limited availability. They shot overseas, etc. But I just look at it and just sort of feel like that's going to be the narrative. It has no chance to win drama series. It's possible that writing or directing could sneak through, but even then, I think Severance, The Pit, White Lotus all have such clear prestige behind them. And so I think we should be happy with what we got and happy the show exists, because at the end of the day, that is what matters. The Emmys are not a form of validation that we must rely on.
If you're just tuning in, I'm David Chen from the Decoding TV podcast, here with Myles McNutt, the creator of the Episodic Medium newsletter on Substack, and we're talking about the 2025 Emmy nominations. If you have questions for Miles and myself, you want to put them in the chat now because we're probably going to wrap up in the next, I'm going to guess, 15, 20 minutes. And if you have questions, we want to make sure we have a chance to respond to them. But before we get to those, let's talk about some other snubs from this year's Emmy nominations. The Hollywood Reporter had a piece by Hilary Lewis, put together some snubs that were kind of interesting. Squid Game, which won 6 Emmys, including the top prize of Best Drama Actor for Lee Jung-jae for its first season in 2022, saw its second season completely absent from this year's nominations. The hit Netflix series' third and final season will be eligible for next year's awards. This is a weird one, Miles. I thought season 2, a lot of people didn't like season 2 very much. I thought season 2 was very solid and deserved at least some love, and certainly compared to the other things that got nominated, was deserving. Any reaction to this? Do you think we're going to see them nominate? Do you think the voters also realized that season 2 and 3 were really just one season, and they're saving those nominations for season 3 next year?
No, I think that voters felt socially pressured to acknowledge Squid Game's breakout success in its first season, and they had no motivation to go back and watch more of it.
Okay.
That's what I think happened. That's
Right.
what I think happened. I think that ultimately, look, you have to understand, like, we're in the wake, that's only a few years removed from Parasite and this sort of moment of sort of like, foreign content arising on our shores and being taken more seriously. And I think they're like, ooh, Squid Game broke all these records, came out of nowhere, this breakout success. And I think that they're just like, well, I got to include that. Netflix made a big push for it, etc. And I think that there's two things happening here. One, I think, is just, people didn't actually care that much about it, didn't come back to it, too long between seasons, out of sight, out of mind, and they're not logging in to make that happen. But I also think we need to acknowledge how much of a footnote Netflix is in these nominations, generally speaking.
Yeah.
This is the single largest producer of television programming, and they managed one nominated drama series and one nominated comedy. Like, that's all they could manage. And realistically, although, yes, both Brody and, Kristen Bell got in for lead actor and actress in comedy, indicating that they are sort of at the forefront of that conversation, but neither of those shows has any shot. Like, Netflix is still sitting on the outside looking in compared to your HBOs, even your FXs, your Apples, who had a very good year, right? With, Shrinking really getting a lot of acting love on the comedy side. Slow Horses really solidifying itself. So I think you sort of have to look at that and think that how much of it is specific to Squid Game and how much of it's just that, like, whatever, glow Netflix had, pun slightly intended based on the Netflix series Glow, which everybody should watch. It's great. That realistically, whatever that was seems to be gone. And I'm curious what that narrative tells us about their ability to stay a part of these conversations.
Do you think it's because of quality, or do you think it's because of
I
anti-Netflix bias? Because it's not anti-streaming bias, because Apple's so represented here, right?
no,
Like,
I do think that there is, to a certain degree, some Netflix originally faced, I think, some pushback, like the whole Orange is the New Black situation going back to 2014, 2015, in which they basically said, no, you're a drama now, you're not a comedy. That was them punishing Netflix for what they perceived as an attack on the system and its legitimacy. But I think since then, Netflix has earned many nominations. And obviously, if you go broadly speaking, they're nominated for all sorts of things in all sorts of areas. But I think at the end of the day, I think it's a question of, like, I think it's perceived, I mean, I would agree with this, that Netflix is quantity over quality, that they are putting out shows en masse and for mass audiences in a way that, like, really Netflix is more of a broadcast network than it is a streaming service in a lot of ways, in terms of its priorities, in terms of its systems. And so as a result of that, well, look, how many broadcast network shows are nominated for anything?
right.
Matlock. That's it. End of list. And so when you start to figure that out, you sort of realize that if that's how Netflix is sort of positioning itself,
Mm-hmm.
it is sort of maybe taking itself out of this conversation by way of making more shows like The Waterfront, like, whatever that Canyon show is, which are effectively attempts to, like, merge these feel-good CW dramas with Taylor Sheridan content. But even Taylor Sheridan content can't get nominated because it's too, like, broad mass appealing
Mm-hmm.
in these cases. So I think there's just some ways that what Netflix is trying to achieve to serve its audience base might be moving it further away from this prestige conversation. And at the same time, it's not competing against itself. It's got one show in each category, can put all its might behind it. But the days of Netflix sort of, like, really, like, dominating the field feel very much like they're over for now.
Yeah, yeah. there were some shows that did get some recognition from Netflix, right? Sirens being a big one. Megan Fahey getting nominated for Best Actress. What else was on the list, Miles, from Netflix?
So Adolescence is the big Netflix
Yes.
play, the limited series play, and it's going to sweep those categories comfortably. It is. We'll see what the Penguin does. Notably, the Penguin is the only limited or anthology series nominated that has both its leads nominated. So obviously, Colin Farrell and Kristen Milotti have a chance in that case. But it really feels like Adolescence, much like Baby Reindeer before it, shows Netflix's ability
Yeah.
to create event programming to capture, and that's really what Squid Game was. Squid Game was an event, right? And so when it launched as an event and took over everything, it flows through the categories. I would argue that Squid Game season 2 was not an event, partly because it's half a season, but also partly because it felt like it was such a long wait in between that even though there's lots of viewership, lots of people still watched it. I think the Emmys pay more attention to like a cultural resonance that I don't think was really there or really achieved in that case.
I think that's fair. Other nominees in the Best Limited or Anthology Series include Black Mirror, Dying for Sex on Hulu, Monsters, the Lyle and Eric Menendez story, and The Penguin, as you already mentioned. Yeah, Black Mirror, another show by Netflix that's gotten some love. There was some writing love. Best Limited or Anthology Series also get nominated, and Best Actress as
Yeah,
well.
Rashida
So
Jones
yeah, Rashida Jones.
got
So
in.
yeah,
And then part of me was sort of like, Paul Giamatti was also in that show, and he didn't get nominated for Best Actor. And I just wonder, like, what was it about that Black Mirror episode? And it's just like, no, I don't think
that,
they
that
watched it. I
that's
don't. I don't.
literally my favorite Black Mirror episode of all time, probably.
Yeah,
The eulogy, I believe, is the name of the episode, and it was an incredible episode. Love
yeah.
the episode. Check out the Decoding TV / Episodic Mediums review. Did you guys cover that? I don't think so.
We did not.
Yeah,
I'm fundamentally
it's
the
binge
binge
release, right?
content,
Yeah.
and honestly, like I feel like the more the Black Mirror goes on, the more it kind of feels like a bit of a cultural footnote,
Yes.
and not quite the kind of system, but good acknowledgement there, and ways of acknowledging that. So yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, yeah, the Paul Giamatti episode of Black Mirror is incredible, worth watching, for sure. And anyway, let's talk about some other snubs on this list. Handmaid's Tale and Yellow Jackets basically got one nomination between the two of them. These used to be cultural juggernauts that dominated the awards, and now the awards have moved on. Don't know if you have
I
any
want to
thoughts.
be.
Yeah,
I mean, Handmaid's Tale was the first streaming show to win an Emmy.
yeah,
Right? It's going to go down. Like Hulu beat Netflix to it. It was a whole scandal at the time. And
yeah.
it's like, how did it manage it? And it's like, it caught a season between Game of Thrones seasons. That's how it happened. Right? Like they were just paying attention to that. And it kind of broke through and captured the zeitgeist. I think it sort of goes in. It's not a Showtime show, but in a similar vein. Look at Homeland, right? Huge Emmy juggernaut, wins for its first season, and then by the time it ends, it's just like it barely exists, right?
Yeah.
It runs so long, and Handmaid's Tale probably ran past its expiration date by nature of long delays, huge delays
Yeah.
between seasons, and by the time it comes out, it's just voters aren't paying attention to it. They're looking at new things. They're kind of figuring that out. I think it's very evident that that's kind of the current trajectory of where things are and where things are headed. And as for Yellow Jackets, I would argue it was never really in a front runner position to begin with. But there's no question that as it kind of creatively kind of loses steam, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying it's lost steam, which I think is an objective evaluation versus subjective one. I think it's very clear that, yeah, voters didn't actually care about it. They weren't invested in it because they're not people. Like, I know they're people. Like, I know voters are actual people, but they don't watch TV like we watch TV. If they do, that's a far minority. They are voting based on the screenings they're invited to, based on the web links they choose to click on of the ones that arrive to their email address, right? Like, these are not serious people who we can view as objective in the way we would be objective. And as a result of that, I think if we start looking for logic or kind of trying to suggest, oh, well, why was this snubbed or why was this snubbed? That could have been like maybe Handmaid's Tale was the one a spot away in every single category. Maybe Elizabeth Moss was that close to breaking into drama
Uh-huh.
actors, right?
Uh-huh.
Like maybe that's the case, or maybe it wasn't even like 12th, 15th, who knows? Without knowing that, we can't really say for certain what narratives make sense, but we can sort of suggest generally that like this is a very narrow vision, both in some categories so narrow there's only 2 shows being nominated, but in other cases just like how far beyond this? Like when people bring up shows like, say, Interview with the Vampire, right? An AMC series, very well regarded online, was nominated for a few TCA awards. It's just like, I don't think Emmy voters know it exists. Like, it is so far past,
Yeah.
right, where they're at and what's going on. Whereas there's other shows like Handmaid's Tale, they know it exists. I truly believe they know it exists. They just aren't paying attention to it. They just don't think it's of the moment of what they're valuing.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, just kind of part of it.
I mean, the first season of Handmaid's Tale was released during the first year of the first Trump administration. You know, so it
Yeah.
has been a long time, and certainly a show can fall out of the cultural conversation during that time period. Only other things to just mention real quickly that might have been people might have found notable. Uzo Aduba getting nominated for Best Actress in a Comedy Series, despite that show being canceled. I think kind of a rarity, right?
Do you remember my alphabet theory from earlier? I'm going with this. I love Uzo Aduba. She is very good in that show, and I think that if people watched it, it's very much this kind of showy Columbo-esque performance, etc. But I'm like, they already nominated Natasha Lyonne for Poker Face. She's right there. They've already done that. Like, why choose Uzo Aduba doing her Columbo thing over Natasha Lyonne doing her Columbo thing? And I just look at that and sort of think to myself, like, what's the difference here? And I think the answer is Uzo Aduba has been long nominated and won multiple times for Orange is the New Black, meaning they know her and understand her. And she's the first name that would come up. I'm just saying, like, I feel like at a certain point, this cannot be a complete crazy conspiracy that voters who didn't watch that much TV, but ultimately have a few people they want to vote for, would be going through and find a name of someone they admire, who they know is a good actress, and who they saw a trailer for it and said, that looked interesting. That's all they need. That's all it takes.
You mentioned Poker Face. I feel like Poker Face did get kind of snubbed this year, right? The only nominee I see is Cynthia Erivo for Best Guest Actress in a Comedy Series, but like no Best Comedy Series or any other acting performances.
I actually would have to check. So Poker Face started before the Emmy deadline, but it did not air all of its episodes. It just finished, meaning that I think the majority of its episodes might have aired after the deadline, which means it would be eligible for series categories next year. It's possible.
Although Cynthia Erivo was in this season, though.
The premiere. So, she was in the premiere, though.
Yeah,
the premiere would have debuted before that date.
Yeah.
Which is all to say that I don't quite know how they chose to square that. But ultimately, certainly, I feel like that's an example of a nomination that I think works out. One I do want to highlight, just as a sort of outlier from this conversation and systems, is Jeff Hiller for Somebody Somewhere on HBO. This is a show that was very much a small niche show HBO used to make. Something like going back to Enlightened. This is a supporting actor in a comedy series. And Jeff Hiller is so good and distinct in that show, and heartbreaking and funny. And it's unfortunate that the way the categories worked out, there was no space for Bridget Everett, the lead of that show, or for the show itself. But the fact that he's not in is completely out of nowhere. He would have been on no prediction lists. His odds on Gold Derby would have been like the worst they could be. And yet here he is kind of sneaking in, suggesting that there was a real groundswell behind that, and suggesting how close maybe Everett and the show were. To me, it is the one singular interesting nomination in this entire year. Like
the only one.
Everything else you can explain away based on sort of like, oh, it's, Coleman Domingo was just in the Oscar conversation. Of course he snuck in. But like, there is no argument for Jeff Hiller sneaking in other than people just loving him in that show.
Right.
And I feel like that is this one bright spot in the midst of there's nothing else behind it. There's no, like, it literally is just a feel-good story. And I'm going to take as many of those as I can in an award show that is just not designed to make you feel good.
I wish that phenomenon you're describing also worked for Andor as well, Miles, but sadly it didn't. I wanted to mention another thing. It just when we last spoke about the Emmys, I think we made the prediction that Liza Colin-Zayas would be nominated, was nominated not for her work in The Bear Season 2, but for her work in The Bear Season 3. And then you and I believe, predicted, maybe it was just you, but I think it was both of us, were like, and now next year we get to see her nominated again for her work in Season 3. something that Emmy
Yep.
voters like to do is recognizing actors for their work in the same season twice, just because of how weirdly the calendar aligns with Emmy voting season, right?
And that's
Uh,
the choice that FX made when they launched the Bear in summer like they did. That was a choice. That was a system they did where they're always going to overlap this way. Ultimately, I would argue that maybe the greatest indictment of the Bear season four's like cultural resonance is that there's no indication that happened this year. Like there's nothing from season four that seemed to really echo in season three
mm.
and its
So that would
nomination.
okay. Well, let's think about what that would be, right? Well, actually, I
Yeah.
don't know if I agree with you because Jamie Lee Curtis did get nominated for Best Guest Actress in Comedy Series for her work in The Bear season 3, uh, and she was barely in
She
that
was
season.
just
I know that, and
she's just
okay,
gonna coast in no matter what.
okay, all right.
But no, I would argue that I would disagree with that. In the Barry season three, she has the episode with her daughter giving birth, where she's in
Oh
the
yeah,
hospital.
that's true. That was actually really incredible.
That's a very prominent
Yeah, yeah,
showcase.
okay. So who
That's what I'm
would
thinking.
be who would be nominated from the Bear season 4 for, nominated for their work in season 3 even though it's for season 4. I don't know that there's that many people that would be that, right?
I guess it would have been like Marcus,
I
maybe,
guess.
but
Yeah.
like he has slightly more, but like not a lot. Like
Yeah.
I don't know. Like he really the focus
Lionel Boyce
episode.
was the name of the actor, by the way.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. The Iowa Debris gets the focus episode, right? So it's like
Mm,
she was getting nominated anyway. That's not a huge
yeah.
surprise. So yeah, I just feel like maybe there's nothing that would have triggered it that way, but it just reminds us that yes, she won for a bit part in season two, and then she's nominated now finally for what is this prominent showcase, Eliza
Right.
Colon Zayas. And now next year, if she's nominated again, she'll be nominated for almost nothing in season four of The Bear. And
Right.
that's not her fault. She didn't do
Yeah.
anything
Yeah.
wrong. She's just
Yeah.
barely a part of that season.
Yeah.
One thing I did want to at least acknowledge in terms of like I wouldn't call it a feel good story because nothing that Nathan Fielder does is ever really feel good. But the
Yeah.
fact that the rehearsal got in for both writing and directing in a comedy series, I think clearly indicates it's usually one of those shows that sneaks in there where it's
Yeah.
like, look, the rest of that category in directing's case is James Burrows for mid-century modern because he's James Burrows, a legendary director of multi-camera television. But like Hacks, The Bear, and The Studio are your three dominant shows with all these nominations and all this presence. So for the Hack the rehearsal snuck into that category, I think is a pretty clear indication of it sort of being that outlier. And I do think that there's something to be said there in terms of a very weird kind of experimental show finding an audience among the people who I would argue, if you go to the writing and directing awards, they're never going to be perfect. There's still going to be multiple nominees for multiple shows a lot of the times, but like at least you'll get a better sense, I think, of who a group of people who really pay attention to the craft of television
Mm-hmm.
are really looking at and watching compared to your actors and compared to your other peer groups. So those, I think, you see representation. Somebody somewhere was nominated for writing for a comedy series. When you go over to drama, this is where Andor was nominated in both categories. And then you also see again, you still see your Seventh and White Lotus and Pit and those types of things, but I think you get a better sense of where that's sort of heading. So that's one bright spot among what is not that dumb as darkness. Like, look, at this point, like it would take a lot for me to be like, these Emmy nominations are terrible. Because what do we expect, right? Like, what do we truly expect that they're ever going to be like, wow, they totally got it right? No,
They
they're not
nailed it
designed
on
to
every
get it right.
category. No, we're not going to expect
No,
that. Yeah. But
but I do think that like you're looking for like a lack of embarrassment, A, and B, sort of those bright spots. And so I wouldn't say there's a huge bright spot year, but I will say that in general, like I'm not against like those are really good actors in The White Lotus and Severance. I'm not
yeah.
sort of like, and I would argue compared to when it was the morning show doing this, which that was ridiculous. In terms of that show does not have that much depth. I would say that was a slightly different conversation. And now I think we just see like how does it shake out? Do these dominant shows, right? Like, are all those Severance nominations indicative of the fact that it's going to sweep through these categories? Right? Like, are those White Lotus nominations going to go nowhere because they're just going to split because there's not enough to differentiate them? I'm interested in those narratives. I think it should be a compelling race. I just think that as a list of nominees, it's just not that. It's just not that interesting.
Our whole conversations about the Emmys can basically be summed up by that Simpsons scene between Homer Simpson and Bart, where he says, what's this feeling I feel? What's the opposite of shame? Pride? No, that's too strong. Less shame? That's basically as good as the Emmys can get. Less shame sometimes is what we're getting. All right. I wanted to mention, by the way, a couple of other random things that I noticed. Best writing for a drama series. Dan Gilroy for Andor, Joe Sachs for The Pit, R. Scott Gemmell for The Pit, Dan Erickson for Severance, Will Smith for Slow Horses, and Mike White for The White Lotus. Great slate. And also The Pit getting nominated twice, which I think is kind of rare. Right, Miles? Is it rare?
So it's so the way, like, if you go back to like the Game of Thrones dominant years,
Yeah.
they were always nominated for multiple awards in this category. So it indicates that. But yes, I will say it's rare. It gives an indication of the fact that The Pit. I recently built an online TV course that my students are currently taking, and I did a couple of conversations with people who work in the industry, and like the first thing they both talked about was The Pit. That I think writers in particular look to The Pit and think this is the future, because they're making a broadcast type TV show with 15 episodes a season that they're going to make every single year and release every single year, and they're doing it for a streaming service. And as Netflix is giving 8-episode orders for shows that take 2 years to come back, writers are like, what am I supposed to do for 2 years waiting for that to happen?
Right.
So they're seeing things like The Pit and really embracing that kind of throwback. And for that reason, I do think that I wonder about The Pit kind of being maybe surprisingly resurgent piece of this narrative when it comes to making that decision and kind of finding that push that it takes those writing categories, the directing categories, etc. Even if you have the main acting categories, I feel like are voted on by so many more people that your more broad showing shows, your Severances, your big viral hits, maybe might have some resonance there. I will also say one thing. I did want to reflect that, yes, Forrest Whitaker is the only physical actor nominated for Andor, but Alan Tudyk is nominated for voicing K2SO for character voiceover performance. So I will say that they did find space somewhere else to make that happen. So I don't want to leave Alan Tudyk out of that conversation in that process.
In the battle between droids and humans, it appears that the Television Academy has taken the side of the droids. Only other thing I want to mention, Miles, is Presumed Innocent got a bunch of nominations. I thought that was kind of interesting. Very silly show, in my opinion, but it got, I think, 4 acting nominations, including Jake Gyllenhaal. Speaking of silly shows, Cate Blanchett got a Best Actress in Limited or Anthology Series or Movie nomination for her work in Disclaimer, which I thought was notable as well. I think the only nomination that show received in the major categories. So, and she's wonderful. I thought the show was very, very goofy, and you can hear our review of it on Decoding TV. But Miles, any other closing thoughts before we wrap up here today?
No, I mean, I think adolescents will sleep through the limited categories. There's really no, I think maybe Farrell wins, but even then, I don't think that's probably likely in the grand scheme of things. And I think you just sort of look and kind of follow that structure of like, what are the Emmys? Are the Emmys a reflection of television shows, or are they like a reflection of the industry? And in other words, it's less about the shows and more about HBO versus Apple versus Netflix versus Hulu versus FX, and of these kind of like shifting patterns. And I think that ultimately that tension is going to become more and more a part of this conversation. It's certainly what I find most interesting about them. And I think it'll be interesting to see who breaks through those narratives, who kind of manages to tell that story. And for the most part, I would say that there's nothing about these awards that suggests anything new. Like, there's no like revelation, there's no understanding. I'd say the conversation we had about Netflix is maybe the part of this that makes me wonder, like, are we seeing this turn of Netflix shifting away from prestige programming and sort of managing that? But otherwise, like, there are so many pockets of these awards. Like, Daily Show is just going to go back to winning talk series with Jon Stewart back every single year, because that's just what's going to keep happening. You're going to see like Traitors is going to win reality again without even a thought, because it's just the show that they're always voting for. So many pockets of the awards leave little room for suspense. So I'll be very curious to see where kind of some of those races between your Severance and White Lotus, these dominant forces, whether that creates space for something else or whether it just becomes that showdown. So that's my takeaway. It's not a profound year, but there's some good TV. I would say that in general, lots of deserving nominees that woke up this morning.
Yeah. I think the Netflix narrative thing is well put, and that Netflix's relevance in these awards is a little bit fading. Worth noting that HBO continues to deliver, a ton of awards every single year, and despite all the chaos going on at Warner Media or Warner Discovery Media, whatever it's called now, HBO Max, the one to watch for HBO, they're still bringing it each year in terms of having buzzworthy shows. And Apple, really, really bringing up the rear with Severance. I mean, this is I actually think this is a huge deal that they are so dominant in the Emmys this year, and it was a great season of television. I mean, it cost apparently like $300 million or something like that, but it was worth it. It was worth it.
You saw it on screen. You saw it on screen.
Saw it on screen.
What I will say is sort of understand. Like, I think we forget, like, Severance won nothing in its first season, right? Because it was coming in the Succession era, right? It was coming out of sort of these eras of dominant sort of HBO style programs that were just sort of considered to be that singular sort of, draw and push. And it's very difficult to disrupt that fundamentally. And I think that now it's like, okay, Severance is the big dog now, right? Severance is that dominant show. And the question is, do they have the juice, as it were, compared to the HBOs of the world, right? In terms of really kind of competing and drawing from that perspective, or is it something like The Pit that I look, at the end of the day, if you give me a drama race, I don't think White Lotus is a meaningful contender. I think they're just going to keep nominating it forever and will never win after that initial limited win. I just don't think it's going to compete in that context. And I think Severance is a clear frontrunner, but like if you're looking for an option, something as a contrast to that highly serialized, esoteric, sort of like withholding kind of environment, The Pit is so grounded. It is so back to basics. It's such a throwback of what TV was or was looking at. And I think that there is some real kind of push there. So be very curious. The Emmys have no precursors, right? The TCA awards are the closest thing we have to sort of an acknowledgement of that in terms of how it plays out. And there's no voter overlap, so it doesn't matter. But I expect The Pit to win drama series with TCA, if I had to guess at this moment in time. And I do sort of feel like it and Severance are your two real options there, which you can't go wrong with that choice. Those are two great, very different seasons of TV. And maybe that's the point, right? These very different visions of what TV can be brought together in these environments.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that Apple continues to cement its positioning as a purveyor of prestige television, and the Severance noms really help with that narrative, and it'll be interesting to see whether they can continue that momentum into the future. But I think they're spending a lot of money to do it, and so far they've delivered a lot of shows that I think really fall into that category. But it takes a lot of work and time and money to maintain that lead.
And honestly, like looking at Severance, obviously, like they did the big, in New Jersey, that big FYC event with Stephen Colbert hosting a panel of all the cast members. Gwendolyn Christie came out with a stuffed lamb. Like they did a stuffed goat. Like they did a whole bunch of like big showy things. But then I look at like the fact that they've consistently gotten slow horses into this race, right? That they're not just getting Severance in. They're not just getting that big prestige show. They're managing it with smaller things. And like there's a limit to that. Like no John Hamm, know your friends and neighbors. Like there's clearly, not going to be so much. But like given where they're at, certainly, they could get Owen Wilson and stick in there next year, right? In that Ted Lasso slot. They're Shrinking made a lot of love this year.
They might get Ted Lasso in the Ted Lasso slot soon.
Myles. Don't talk to me about that right now. I don't need to hear that. That's at least far enough away that I don't need to worry about it for another 2 years.
All right. That's fair. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. If you're watching us on YouTube at youtube.com/@decodingtv. And thanks for listening. If you're listening to the Decoding TV podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, joining me today has been Myles McNutt from the Episodic Medium Substack newsletter. Be sure to subscribe. I consider it a must read for anyone who's into the medium of television. Myles, thank you so much for chatting with us today. I'm David Chen. That's going to wrap us up for today. We'll see you later. Goodbye.